Okay, everyone. Molly is a speaker we asked to come here and talk to us a little bit about the disaster part of the Red Cross because we don't know a lot about it and we're hoping that we can learn. So Molly, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you for that fabulous introduction. Especially because this is a small group. I'd love for today to be more of a conversation for us. So feel free to shout out at any point during this with questions or responses. I'd also like to make this really intentional about what you're hoping to get out of it, because I will talk. I love talking. I'm pretty good at it. And so I'll ramble on for hours if you let me. So, but I want this to be meaningful for your group. So if you don't mind, can we just go around, everybody take a turn, tell me your name, what grade you're in, and kind of why you're doing this club, why you're part of the Red Cross.
I'm Rachel. I'm a senior. I was basically in this club because I wanted to be a volunteer, and then I didn't have the time to do it. So then they said that this would be a really good option. And I really liked actually learning more about what the Red Cross does. And I've learned a lot from Jocelyn mainly so far. So I think this will be really interesting.
Awesome. Cool. Jocelyn is fantastic.
My name is Kennedy. I'm also a senior, and it initially started as like volunteer service hours for my graduation, but then I kind of stopped caring about or I forgot to log them, and I would keep coming, and I'm just like, I like learning about this stuff, and I did Red Cross babysitting stuff when I was younger, and that was pretty fun. So I just wanted to continue that.
Very cool.
Person. I'm Aaliyah. I'm in 8th grade, and I think it's kind of interesting to know how people aid with disasters like that, and yeah.
English
sister dragging you here.
And then Holly, I don't know if you want to speak up too. You're still there?
I'm Holly. I'm a junior, and I joined this club mainly for same with Rachel, just volunteering, but with work and stuff, I don't have that much time, but just learning about what to do in different scenarios and stuff is still really interesting to me.
Awesome. Well, very cool. Well, I'm really pumped that you all you're the only club that we have that's not based out of a school, which is pretty awesome. It means that you care that much more. This isn't something easy. You are all going out of your way, and I think that that's really cool. So I'm Molly McCormick. I am a disaster program specialist with the Wisconsin Red Cross. My chapter is Southwest Wisconsin, so it's 18 counties in Southwest Wisconsin, so it was a good name. They picked it well. And Rock County is one of the counties that I help serve. I work out of the La Crosse area office, and then my supervisor is out of Madison. But we travel around a lot. 18 counties is a big space. So we're as far north, I don't know how well you know the western part of the state, but we're as far north as Buffalo, Trumpealo, Jackson counties. So Black River Falls is kind of our cutoff. And then we go all the way down to you all. So it's a big area. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of what I do and what our team does. But also at any point, if you all have questions, before the Red Cross, I was a teacher and I served in the Peace Corps. And so I know with a lot of you kind of as seniors and juniors, you're thinking about next steps, thinking about college. I would be more than happy to talk about any of my experiences. So if you have questions as we're moving forward, kind of how I wound up here. I loved volunteering when I was in high school. I was a part of Key Club, which is the Leo Club, or it's a volunteer group, and I was in student council, Future Educators of America. I did all the clubs and all the things, And I didn't realize that I could make a job out of that until I came to, well, really through the Peace Corps and then the Red Cross. So like I said, I really want this to benefit you all as individuals, as well as kind of give you information. So just thinking about disaster, anybody want to share what comes to your mind when you hear the word disaster?
Tornadoes.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
absolutely.
big weather events.
Yes.
Big weather
Rock County
events.
probably doesn't really see too many crazy weather events besides like tornadoes and such like that, like severe weather.
Yeah, for sure. I'm thinking you guys probably think something along these lines, right? You're thinking what we just saw go through Kentucky was this major severe weather event where we had multiple tornadoes, a lot of damage, and truly it was a catastrophe by definition of the word. And you might think even, you know, just a couple months before that, we had Hurricane Ida go through. And all the photos that you're going to see throughout the PowerPoint, that's really why I did this, is kind of let you see what these disasters look like. They're all from the Red Cross. These are all photos that we've compiled and come from our stock library. So they're all real, and they're all us on scene for these events and the aftermath of them. Another big one that maybe comes to your mind are the wildfire. That was hard to say. Wildfires out in California. And this has been a big topic, not only this year but last year as well. And so, kind of having these images in your head about these disasters. So we're going to do a little moment, like the more you know. When I was growing up, this was the big thing on TV. It would be like, da 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 da, the more you know. And we're just going to have this moment to talk about disasters before I start getting into the nitty gritty of what my role is and what a lot of my team does for disaster cycle services. So if you had to guess, we're going to play a little guessing game because I think that's more fun. I taught middle school, so if I didn't tie a game to it, nobody wanted to be a part of the conversation. So we just wrapped up 2021, and we measure disasters a lot of times by how much they cost. And so a really large scale disaster, typically we look at a disaster that costs over $1 billion. That's kind of where that catastrophe level is marked. When you're looking at it from the National Weather Organization, when you're looking through emergency management point of view, and even us at the Red Cross, that's kind of our marker. So if you had to guess right now, how many disasters do you think there were in this past year that cost over $1 billion in damage?
There's so many wildfires.
Yeah, there's so many wildfires. Oh gosh.
200.
Rachel guesses 200. Are we cold or warm?
You're colder in the sense that, like, all of those separate wildfires a lot of times are actually considered one disaster.
Okay.
And so if they're going on at the same time, they're one disaster. So even though the tornadoes in Kentucky were multiple tornadoes, it's one disaster. So I'll just put it out there. There were 20.
Okay.
Which is a big deal.
Yeah.
You know how everybody's doing the, what is it, the 10-year challenge? That's pretty, I'm not hip to the drive with social media anymore.
I'm not, that's these kids.
Everybody's doing like this 10-year challenge where you see the difference, right? Yep. And if we look back, so 2021, we had 20, which it was a pretty substantial number. And like over $300 billion in damages. Last year, before that, 2020, even higher, we had 22, which is also astronomically high. We do the 10-year challenge, we look at the numbers from 2010, there were 6 disasters that total, each disaster on its own was over $1 billion in damages. And so a lot of what we're doing right now is we respond to these disasters, but we're also looking at the cause. And with a lot of you being, juniors, seniors, even as an 8th grader, I would hope that you all are talking about some things through science, through your political science classes as well. Why do you think we're seeing such an uptick in disaster, if you were to guess?
Climate change.
Yeah, nailed it.
Climate change.
It's exactly what's happening. And I'm so excited whenever I talk to the people that are wrapping up their high school careers right now and moving into this college. You all have such a better sense of climate change and are super passionate about it. And that's what we need. The Red Cross, especially from Disaster Cycle Services, is we're taking on goals specifically around climate change. And we're pushing this forward as part of our mission to say, hey, we are seeing the ramifications. We are dealing with the aftermath. And, when I showed you these pictures, we're seeing an uptick. Yeah, disasters have always happened. They're going to continue to happen. We can't stop them, but they're getting larger and they're becoming like these Kentucky tornadoes. Even us in Wisconsin, we had tornadoes in December this year. That's wild. That's never happened in our history where we had a tornado this late in the year and this far north. So just as we go through this, I really wanted to give you a background to the Red Cross and what we do, but I want to empower you all to leave this conversation today and think about not only what we do to respond to disaster, but what we can be doing moving forward to kind of help mitigate disaster, which is like the best part of my job is mitigation. How can we stop things from having such a large impact? How can we change the path that we're on right now? And so we're talking about these big, large, billion-dollar disasters, but that's not all I do. In fact, that's a really, really, really small chunk of what I spend my time on. In fact, the number one disaster that the Red Cross responds to, does anybody want to guess? We talked about tornadoes, hurricanes already. Neither of those are the number one disaster that we respond to.
Like a house fire.
House fires?
Nailed it. You are on top of it. Loving it. Yeah. We number one disaster that we respond to in the United States is a house fire. If you had to guess, how frequently do you think we respond to a house fire?
We had like just 2 people in our grade whose houses burned down.
Like a
couple years
daily
ago.
basis, probably?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the United States, so I won't give you Wisconsin specific numbers, but across the United States, the Red Cross responds to a home fire every 8 minutes.
Are they like more prevalent, obviously, maybe like during the winter months when there are like the space heaters and the Christmas lights and stuff like that? Do those that kind of determine numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. Right now for Wisconsin, we're in our highest time frame for home fires. And so we have a really large uptick starting usually in October. We had a pretty warm fall this year. So it took a little bit longer, but we have had several single family fires, which is one household, but we've had a huge amount of multifamily fires, which are like apartment buildings. And if you follow the news at all, we've had really devastating out in New York with that apartment building, and it came down to a space heater and the door not being shut.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of talk through that as we get going too, because I'll save that for the end, because it's my favorite part to talk about is what we can do to help. But just for your knowledge of Red Cross and how we word things and what we do, when we look at disaster, we look at response. And so the number one response that we have is to home fires, and we have what we call a disaster action team. Those volunteers are specifically trained to respond to home fire events. So what happens is we get a call either from the fire department, the dispatchers, or the families themselves that have had fires, and they will call our dispatch hotline, which is 24/7. Somebody is there to answer the phone, and then we follow up on it. We try to get a team of at least 2 people out to that fire to help provide assistance to those individuals, to those families. And usually that looks like immediate assistance right away, which is financial assistance that can help them get a hotel room. It can help them go buy clothes to replace what they need right away if they need food. It's just a little bit of money to get them through those first couple of days of this really traumatic event. In addition to that immediate assistance, we provide services for health. So if you lost medications or glasses or anything like that in the fire, we have a team of volunteers that will reach out. They will help you to replace those as soon as possible. A lot of times we have people that have medical equipment that they need. It's more of an emergency base, and we help make those connections so they can get access to that right away. It's also traumatic. This is a very, very scary situation that a lot of people, you kind of have this, well, it's not going to happen to me. You just don't think it's going to happen to you, even though every 8 minutes, we respond to a home fire, and that's just the Red Cross. We don't respond to every home fire. We don't get a call for everybody. Some people have insurance. Some people feel okay to go on without that extra assistance from us. So it does happen prevalently, but it's never in your mind that it's going to happen to you. And it can be overwhelming. So we have a team of volunteers that are either social workers or psychiatrists. They have to have that special certification in their daily lives and then they sign up for this specialized team, and they will reach out to these families and these individuals, and they'll just check in on them. They'll see how they're doing. They'll be there to listen. They'll be there to give them some resources to kind of help cope and get through those first couple of days. And then the last of those individual cares that we offer is spiritual care. And so if someone just needs that extra spiritual care assistance, at the Red Cross, we don't discriminate. We're not religiously based. And so whatever option that they might be looking for, we'll make a connection. And we have volunteers on our team that represent all of the major religions, and they'll reach out, even if it's just via phone call, and provide that support if the families request it. So we really try to be there for those families in a holistic approach. And the picture that you're seeing on your screen is a fire that happened earlier. It was late summer, early fall, up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, in Calumet. And it was a big apartment building, and we had 18 households that were displaced. And as you can see from the photo, they were everything was destroyed. So we were able to get a team there. We were able to get them assistance right away. In a larger scale fire, we provide what we call mass care, which I'll get into in a couple of slides. But it's really about making sure people are safe and have somewhere to go, and then start meeting those needs one by one. If you take a psychology class, you might hear the hierarchy of needs, of what we need to survive, what we need emotionally, what we need intellectually. It kind of bubbles out. So we start with those most basic needs. What do you need to survive? And once we've got that box checked, how do we meet those next needs? Some of that comes from us, and some of that comes from partners. And so when you look at just it's just wild what a fire can do to a home. And really, it depends on where the fire starts and what kind of fire it is. But even a really small fire, because of smoke damage, because if it gets into the electrical, can displace a family for several days, for several weeks. And so when you look at pictures like this, it's very clear that this is a destroyed home. People aren't going to be able to move back into this place. But we deal with fires that from the outside don't really look like much, but because that damage has cut off utilities, because that damage has made it, that they can't be there safely for the next 48 hours to the next couple of weeks, we still provide that support. And so these are all photos from Wisconsin fires that have happened in the last year. So these are 2021 fires. And I didn't have any more recent. We did have fires right away, starting off 2022. We had an apartment fire in Wausau, Wisconsin, which is right in the middle of the state. And then we've had a couple of apartment fires in Milwaukee already. By and large, Milwaukee is our largest response area. They have the most fires, which probably isn't surprising if you think about the population size. They're much more populous area than other spots in the state. And so this is kind of one of those situations where you see that there's a fire, there's the fire crew is going to be there, and this apartment building doesn't look anything like this or like this. But an apartment building fire can displace people for months. And it's one of the hardest things right now, because not only, we're there for that immediate assistance, we're there to get them through those first couple of days, those first 2 weeks. After that, our services start to decline, because that's our lane, that's our job, is to get people. Then we start relying on partners to help kind of take over. We start what we call the recovery process. So we have volunteers that are specifically trained to help people with those next steps. And so they will reach out and they open up, through that case, they will connect them with other resources. And so they'll help them talk to their insurance. They'll talk to them about little things like getting the smoke smell out of your clothing if you're able to retrieve your clothing. And so where it moves away from meeting those needs, that survival need, to those next steps. How can we help you? Because we've become experts in those next steps. How can we give you some guidance in what we already know to get you back on your feet? And some families with recovery are like, okay, great, this is helpful, and then they're done and they're happy with the Red Cross. And some folks need more help, and so it really is individually based. And we try to really provide that service and to be there for people as much as we can be. At the same time, staying in our lane. I know that you all are getting ready to talk about a fundraiser. With the Red Cross, if you think about every 8 minutes we're responding to a home fire, and that we're providing immediate assistance, we're providing, those extra things, that all adds up really quickly. So it's really important with the size of our organization that we stay dedicated to what our mission is. And so our mission is to alleviate suffering for folks that need it the most in that immediate time frame. What's nice about the recovery process is we're not just saying, okay, we're done. We're saying, here, let's give you other resources. And it's really a big part of what we do. And I don't think it gets praised as much. This is what you see a lot in the news is this initial response. What a lot of people don't realize is the extra steps that our teams are taking to provide that extra support and to be there for people. And so mass care, I think that if you know anything about disaster, if you think about anything with disaster and you see this logo on the news or you see the hurricanes, you always see images like this. And mass care, the biggest thing that a lot of people think of is sheltering. When we get new volunteers that come to the Red Cross, they want to help out, this is what they picture in their head. Because when a disaster strikes and it's a large group of people, we provide that shelter, that physical space for people to go when they have nowhere else to go. When we had those large apartment fires, we provided a shelter. During COVID, that meant a hotel room to keep everybody safe the best way that we could. Now we're back to our traditional way, which is we have these locations that we have partnerships with, that we have set up in advance. And we make a lot of phone calls and we say, hey, we've had an apartment fire. Hey, we have a big storm coming in. Is your space available? Can we come utilize your space? We put cots, we bring all the supplies in, we have it set up. We have a team of volunteers that are going to be there 24/7 in shifts. And so that's a big part of, I think, the image of disaster response for the Red Cross. But
Do you
there's
have,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
do you have like a shelter location set up in like each community or each county, like a predetermined one? So say something happened in Rock County, like a tornado went through Rock County. Is there a Rock County location that you have set up to be on standby, I guess?
So we have agreements set up ahead of time. A lot of times it's churches or it's schools. And so I could tell you, I'm pretty sure in Rock County, like we have a partnership with the Janesville Public Schools.
Sure.
And so we have access to some of their buildings. In Beloit, we also, I don't know about the schools, but there's some churches in Beloit. Since those are your major areas, that's typically where we have the agreements, unless it's a disaster prone area.
Sure. Okay.
So in smaller communities, like where I live, we have a lot of flooding in our smaller communities. So we have those pre-established. And it's also not 100% we're not in charge. It's actually emergency management. So every county has emergency management that's tied to their fire and police and sheriff,
Right.
and as well as your human resources for your county. And they actually have the plans. We have the partnership with them that they give us a call, tell us that there's a need, and we assist. So anytime you see a shelter open, that's a partnership.
Mhm.
And it's a partnership with the place that's hosting us. It's also a partnership with your local government. Great questions.
Thank you.
So I've deployed on a couple of large scale disasters. And I think for me, realizing that this mass care is a lot more than sheltering. When we do mass care, it also covers all the supplies. So we'll distribute supplies to people. So even if they're not staying in a Red Cross shelter, after tornadoes, we'll take big cleanup kits. So we give people supplies. Sometimes we do coolers. We'll go around in what we call our ERVs, which are our emergency response vehicles, and hand out meals to people that are out just cleaning up in the community. Usually when those big storms go through, it means no power, which makes access to food a little bit trickier. And so distributing food, distributing goods, just kind of, we'll even just circle neighborhoods to make sure people know information. One of the hardest things about after a disaster hits is if the cell phones towers are out, power is out, communication becomes a lot harder. People don't rely on radio as much as they used to. And so it can be quite tricky to get information out if the cell phone towers are out, if power's out. When the derecho went through Iowa, not this summer, but last summer, that was a huge issue. We didn't know. We didn't know people were in need because they didn't have a way to get that out to us. And it took us a lot longer to mobilize because of it. Actually, this top corner, that's me. This is me in Iowa. We were loading up supplies to take out to these farm communities that didn't have the same resources that the cities did, that didn't have as much information. And so we were trying as best we could to really spread out the resources to the folks that needed it the most. And then there's one more thing to mass care, and that's reunification. So after major disasters, sometimes families get separated, or people from other parts of the country can't get a hold of their families. We will help to connect people as much as we can, which is really, it's not as big as it once was, thanks to social media, things like Facebook having marked safe. That's really helped, and we've started to lean into that and to utilize those tools more than what we've used in the past. But that's mass care. Those are mass care and seeing us at site of fires, I think are very much what people see for the Red Cross. They see our big vehicles going out to the community. There's a lot of things that happen. This is why our volunteer force is so important. And that's why I hope all of you consider staying with the Red Cross as you go into college, as you graduate college, because 95% of the disaster workforce are volunteers. Those 18 counties I told you that were in our chapter, there are 2 paid staff that oversee that. Everything else is done by volunteers. And a lot of the work is actually behind the scenes that isn't that face-to-face thing that you think of. These are 2 examples. And so disaster assessment is where we send our volunteers out into these communities and they record the damage to the property so that we can get those folks as much assistance as possible. On really big disasters, that includes getting information to FEMA so that FEMA can help pay these folks to help replace their homes that they've lost. We share information with emergency management. We share information with FEMA, who is kind of the government version of the Red Cross, is kind of what I think of about FEMA. And they're there to help for emergencies and those large scale disasters. And then the other one is information and planning. This doesn't just happen when we're responding to any kind of event, big or small. There needs to be a group of people that help collect the information that's going out and make sure that everything's communicated to the entire team, and then planning to move forward. So when we have a big apartment fire, we have to have someone that collects all the information so that we know we have a feeding plan. We know how we're going to get meals to these people for the next 2 weeks. We know who's in charge of handling any media questions that come in. We know who's in charge of sheltering at the site. We know who's making those recovery calls. So it's a really important behind the scenes position that I think gets overlooked a lot. And I'm going to keep talking, and then let's just open it up for questions afterwards. So I'll kind of tell you about the positions, and then we'll tackle ideas and questions. The other 2 behind the scene kind of positions that we have, external relations. So, and we would love volunteers to help us out when it comes to like social media and getting word out about what we're doing and how we're helping, but also when that disaster strikes, helping to pull information. This community needs help because we saw it on Facebook. It's the wildest thing. That wasn't something that happened even as much as 5 years ago. Now, because of social media and the things that people are able to post out there, it's a lot quicker way for us to assess, hey, we need to make sure that this neighborhood has assistance. When we had those big storms in December that came through, one of the ways that we knew that we needed potentially a shelter site because the temperature was dropping and this community was still going to be without power, it's because they had a neighborhood association Facebook page, and we could see everybody that was still without power. Our external relations team is a part of that. They're also a part of about getting the messaging out, and helping us to share our story, which is incredibly important because we only operate based on donation from the community. So all of that plays into how we're able to do what we do. And then logistics is all the fun behind the scenes stuff, is how are we going to get that supplies from point A to point B? Who's got the cars? Like, what chapter are we pulling our emergency response vehicle from? Logistics does so much. They do so much behind the scenes. And it's just crazy to think about. When we were so I was deployed to Fort McCoy recently to help with the Afghan refugees. And we were there right from the start, right when they were arriving. And without our logistical team, we just wouldn't have been able to do anything that we did. We ended up bringing in millions of diapers and formula, which wasn't in our plan when we had our information and planning sessions. That wasn't a thought that we were thinking we were going to be responsible for. And then we were, and we had logistics teams that were going out and shopping and procuring, asking for donations, and getting all of this stuff that we desperately needed. And it was really amazing to see how quickly and the quantity that they were able to do. And it's because they're very skilled and trained at what they do, and they're passionate, and they're okay with being behind the scenes, which is incredibly valuable to everything that we do. And then all of that staff, all of that workforce, we have hundreds of volunteers coming to those really large scale disasters. But even those multifamily fires, if we can't figure out the volunteers and scheduling them, getting them places to stay if they're going to be there, that all goes through what we call staff services. And also incredibly important behind the scene work that they're a lot of times the unsung heroes of the Red Cross, because they take care of us. They make sure that we have a place, that we are being fed, and that we are being treated with respect. And so they're a really great team that without them, we wouldn't be able to do anything that we do. And then even disaster technology. So there is something for everybody based on your skill set, your interest, within even just disaster at the Red Cross, if you want to volunteer. We have teams that come out because anytime we have those larger scale disasters or even a medium-sized disaster, we need computers so that we can open up cases for those clients. We need cell phones to help connect the team. We need different elements that we don't necessarily expect our volunteers to have on standby. The Red Cross wants to be able to provide those for any Red Cross work that they're doing. So we have a specialized team that will come out and set up a printer in the middle of an army tent in Fort Bliss, Texas, because we need to be able to print things to support our clients better. So that's a lot of what I do for disaster. I have kind of this blue sky because my job also involves blue sky, which I'll talk about. But before I do that, questions, things that you want me to dig in deeper about for the things that I've talked about, which is a lot.
Any questions, or Mesa or Holly?
Yeah, sure. Are your volunteers, do they stay locally or do they travel at all, like out of state or anything?
Yeah, great question. And so volunteers have the option. They can, what we call is deploy. So when you're going to be on scene for a disaster for an extended period of time, we deploy them. And so they can deploy locally, they can deploy regionally. For us, our region is all of Wisconsin and then most of the counties that are in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and then nationally. National also includes some of like the Caribbean, as well as the some of the Eastern Pacific islands. So they have that option, and it's a really great opportunity if you all are thinking about wanting to explore that, especially if you're a college student and you are on summer break and you don't have to be back for college classes until September. There's usually a large scale disaster in August. It would get you experience. We give you the training. It gives you a lot of life experience to go out to do that. And it's a little intimidating, but you all seem like you take initiative, and that would be really cool. All you have to do is sign up to be a volunteer. You already are Red Cross volunteers because you're part of this club, but you would no longer be a youth volunteer at that point. You would be a full-fledged volunteer, and you would have that opportunity. We pay for the travel to get you out there. We give you what they call a mission card, which is like a prepaid Visa debit almost, that you get to use to pay for your food, and little miscellaneous things. Like when I got out there, I didn't have nail clippers, which sounds silly and mundane, but I was like working out distributing the supplies, and I kept breaking nails and it was killing me, so I went and bought nail clippers. So those kinds of things. So we don't expect any money to come out of your pocket. And I would just say, if you're looking for that kind of opportunity, it would be really great, especially if you're kind of exploring what you want to do after college. So I'll just put that out there.
Thank you.
No worries. Good questions.
Is it like more valuable to have maybe like a volunteer who is like a nurse or something? Like, I don't know, like, do you actively try to recruit people like that more because they have experience if you have something like really that's more of an emergency than something else? Or like, I don't know, I was kind of thinking like there might be some people with like more experience in certain scenarios that would be, I guess, very useful to have as volunteers that could be deployed in certain areas and stuff like that.
I mean, that's a great question. Every single volunteer brings something to the table, and I think that we try to value and encourage whatever skill set that you're bringing. And so we have a ton of nurses that are volunteers, and they're hard to come by sometimes, so we're really excited. I'm thinking of what it's like to be a nurse in this climate and how hard that must be. So any of these individuals that are willing to give us their extra time, I really applaud them and don't know how they do it. But sometimes nurses come to us and they don't want to be in health services, which to be a disaster health services volunteer, you have to have that background. You have to have that certification. They want to do sheltering, or they want to do distribution of emergency supplies. They want to do other things because they want to do something different than what they have to do every day for work. And we try to honor that. So sometimes people will come to us with a really specific background, and we'll be like, oh, you would be great for this. And they're like, no, that's not what I want to do. And so really it's about your experience as a volunteer. You are doing this for your community, but you're doing it for yourself. I tell my volunteers, if it's not filling you up, I don't want you doing it. I want this to make you feel good about what you're doing. And every single volunteer is important. So when you're coming, if you are applying to be a volunteer, we're going to be excited about you no matter what background you're coming from. There are skill sets that we are continually searching for. It's hard for us to have mental health professionals. Those are shorter in supply. So we'll do special recruitment, and bilingual volunteers are phenomenal, and we don't have enough of them. So I think one of our big pushes right now is that we're really looking at the diversity of our workforce and making sure that we represent our communities. Good question.
So like, say like you need to have somebody deployed like on the other side of the country or whatever, do you ask them if they'd like to be deployed there, or do you just send them?
Oh no, it's always an ask. Good question. Sometimes because I'm paid staff, sometimes it's more, Molly, would you like to go? But it's not as much of a question. But for our volunteers, it's always going to be a question. And we use Volunteer Connection quite a bit to do that. So what happens is they're able to get in and say, hey, I'm available to go nationally during this time. And then that team of like staff services, and we call them in Blue Sky, they're called workforce engagement. They actually call out. So we have a team of volunteers that call and say, hey, there's this position open out in California. Are you interested in going? And you can say yes, or you can say no. If you say yes, typically you're leaving in the next 48 hours, depending on the situation. So it's kind of an adrenaline rush. You get the call and you're like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna go. And you've got like your bag and you're like quick packing, you're making your arrangements, you're making your flight, and you get all this adrenaline, and you show up, and then you sit and you wait. And but then things start to fall into place, and you figure out what you're going to be doing, and you meet your supervisors. But what we call is a disaster response operation, so a DRO. Every DRO is different. So some of that is your supervisors, some of that is the location that you're at. So even though maybe you sign up to be a sheltering volunteer, it might feel different every time you go out on deployment. But you always have a choice. And you're there as a volunteer. We ask for 2 weeks. We ask you to be there for 2 weeks. You can always extend if you're able to. But if emergencies happen or you're really uncomfortable, you can always ask to go home early. So it's really flexible to you and your needs. And we like to respect that.
Cool, thanks.
Very good question. Is it fun?
Yeah, it's wild, guys. I won't lie to you. So I'll tell you a little bit. I've been out to Oregon for wildfires. My first deployment with the Red Cross was in Iowa for the derecho storm, which was that straight winds. It was basically like having a hurricane go through Iowa, but the winds didn't turn, they just went straight. If you all have ever been to Iowa, there's nothing there to slow down the wind. It's just flat farmland. And I like saw silos turned over, buildings where like rooms were just cut off. It just, you see some crazy things when you're out on deployment. I deployed for Fort McCoy, which is a very different situation than we've done typically in the past, but made me a better human to be there. And when you go out on these deployments, you get all this adrenaline and you kind of feel like, okay, I'm going to be a superhero. And then you slowly realize like, no, I'm just a regular person and I'm going to help out however I can and be there. And so you get to meet a million people, whether they're Red Cross volunteers or they're people that are getting help from the Red Cross, and you get to hear their stories. And I think that's probably one of the best parts about being on deployment is getting to listen to other people share. And I have met the most unique and interesting humans in these experiences. When I was at Fort McCoy, I met this little girl, and she was 10 years old. And if you think about her life at that point, she got on a plane with her family when her country was being taken over by the Taliban, and in less than a week's notice, they got on a plane with a suitcase and came to a country. They came to several countries to get here in their journey, um, with next to nothing. And this little girl, this young lady, was just happy. She was just happy, and she would come get a coloring book for me every day, and she just had the most beautiful English you'd ever heard. She spoke better English than I did, and she would just fill these coloring books in every day. She loved it. She'd bring us the pictures, and then she would talk to us, and she'd help us translate for other guests that didn't speak English. And she said, we were talking, and she said, I want to be a doctor. And I said, you're gonna be a doctor. And it was just really cool to just get to be a part of her life in a really small way, knowing that because she was here, because her family was able to get here, she was gonna have that opportunity. And so it's like, it is fun and amazing and really hard sometimes. So it's just a lot of things. So if I can encourage you all to think about it, definitely start thinking about it. Think about what you want to do with your summers off. We do internships at the Red Cross. So if you're thinking about college internships, think about the Red Cross. If you want to do something, what we call in the humanitarian services. So if you like nonprofit work, if you like helping people, it's a good group to think about. All right. So I'll just, other than disaster, like responding, which is again a small part of what I do, a lot of the other parts of disasters, it's being ready for disasters. Like you said, the question about the sheltering, that was a great way to say during blue skies. So when things are going well, we're checking in with our partners, we're managing those relationships, making sure that we have all the supplies if something were to happen, and being aware. I watch the weather all the time. My family now makes fun of me because I'm like hyper aware about what's happening with the weather. But my favorite part of my job is preparedness, which isn't something people think about for disasters. So within disaster cycle services at the Red Cross, we actually install smoke alarms for families that need them. So all they have to do is put in the request, and we will set them up with an appointment. We have volunteers that come out. We'll install up to 3 alarms, and we do a little education about fire safety. Because at the end of the day, smoke alarms save lives. We know that. We've seen data over and over again. And it's really, really cool to get to do that. And it's actually something that maybe your youth group could be a part of if you have interest. Preparedness is where we utilize our youth groups the most. So something to think about maybe moving forward is if you wanted to do some kind of event or organize an event in your community, and my team could come down and we could work with you all to make that happen. The other thing I do is, and I actually oversee this for all of our chapter, is we do youth programming. So we will go into classrooms, and we have curriculum set up to teach kindergarten through 2nd grade, and then 3rd through 5th graders about disaster preparedness. So being ready for emergencies. They're actually really cool programs that I love doing. It's one of my favorite things to do. And just getting them thinking about what they can do to help their families be better prepared. We do community presentations, we do hands-only CPR, all things that, like, you as high school students, if you wanted me to come work with you all. I could train you and you could help me. We could do presentations at your high school. Once it's safe to do that. I don't know if you have outside visitors right now or not, but we could do like preparedness stuff, especially if your seniors thinking about life after high school. What, as an early adult, are you thinking about smoke alarms? Are you thinking about living in your first apartment and what that might mean? Those kinds of things. So that's kind of just what I wanted to bring up here at the end was my personal plug, because preparedness is my favorite. I'd much rather help people be less affected by disaster than be there when they've lost everything because they weren't as prepared as they could have been. So I talk a lot and I talk fast. I'm really excited you guys invited me to come talk. This is my information. You all can message me or email me anytime you guys have questions or want to know more or have ideas and want to talk them out.
Well, Molly, I really, really appreciate that. Was a great presentation. I hope the girls got something out of it too, and maybe one of or two of them become volunteers for you. But yeah, thank you so much. That was some great information, and hopefully when we share this on YouTube, we'll see some other students kind of take a look at it as well. It was great. Thank you.
Well, yeah, you all are awesome. Keep volunteering, even if it's not with the Red Cross. It makes your life better. Yeah. So keep doing it. You all are awesome, and you're on a good path. So